Okay, here is our part four of video two, going through the separate context and developing thesis thinking. And so let's go ahead and just get started. Our fourth context is a church denominational study. And so this won't be available for everybody. This is kind of a pastoral part two. The first context worked with a pastor in a church. We already saw that one. But this one is thinking a little bit more macro. And this might not be for everybody, but it seems that every year in the thesis cohorts, we have a couple of people who start thinking about larger issues and those connected with their own denominations. So here is the next context. Ben is an established pastor in a small Northwest denomination of about 60 small churches. While Ben is not recognized leadership within the denomination, he knows many other church pastors in the denomination, and at annual gatherings, he usually is given a pretty good voice. 4 years ago, Ben started focusing his ministry around home groups at the center of his church because he believed that they provided real community, accountability, and with good leaders in place, he was fortunate to see even mission and discipleship develop. Some of his home groups have grown substantially, and a few of them have grown, divided, and reproduced 2 or 3 times. This has got the church very excited. It's led to new conversions and actual lay people baptizing other people and discipling them. And so the church is growing, and it seems to be centered around this investment in home groups. Ben sees in the denomination that there are some churches that are growing and some that are declining. Mostly the declining churches are older churches, more established churches, or those in rural areas. But Ben also does know of a few other churches who are doing either home groups or small groups that seem to be the driving force behind church growth in these smaller, successful churches. And so Ben is interested to see if the denomination will seek investment in home groups or small groups like this. Just this last year, Ben appealed to church leaders to move away from focusing their time and money on improving homiletics, Sunday school education, foreign missions, and facility improvements, and to instead focus first and foremost on these home group models that are reproducing and bearing fruit within the denomination. In other words, Ben is saying, this is what the Spirit of God seems to be blessing at my church and a few other churches. We as a denomination should do this. While denominational leaders respect Ben and heard him, they did not feel the need to make a change at this time, though they were open to Ben and told Ben to keep pursuing this. So Ben, in a desire to steer his denomination towards what he firmly believes is what God is calling him to do, Ben wants to help the denominational leaders see the power of these reproducing communities around home groups and small groups. So, what would a theory look like in this context? What is Ben's theory? Yes, Ben believes that small groups are a more effective way to disciple and multiply and to lead to church growth. So basically, Ben believes that the right kind of small group or home group, and that's going to need to be defined and clarified. He's going to need to get that clear. What is that method or model? And he believes that leads to healthier church or to more successful churches, which he's again going to need to clarify. Is that, in forms of discipleship, leadership development, or, growth, conversions, what have you. But that's his theory, that churches that have active home groups, small group ministries, and they focus first and foremost on growing those, are maybe healthier churches. So what would an investigative or discovery thesis project look like? Yeah, these are starting to sound very similar, aren't they? But that's developing the thesis thinking. That one kind of project could very easily be studying not only his church, but other churches that have these groups and looking for common principles. Because if he and these other people are doing something similar, but they didn't do it in a coordinated fashion, the question becomes, are they basically doing the same thing? And if so, what are those principles? Because if you could discern the principles of home groups and small groups of the ones that are successful, what are the common principles that we're all doing, then that might be principles that could be implemented in other places. So that would be one sort of investigative TP. Another one would be to go to the declining churches and to see what their experience is. Perhaps they've already tried this and it didn't work. There are ways of studying both the successful items or the failure items. And of course, if Ben really believes in small groups, there's probably investigative work he could do on other forms of literature and other groups that are maybe doing this outside of his denomination well. Or he might study denominational change. There are lots of investigative TPs here. But what would an experimental one look like? Yeah, I think a very smart play for Ben would be to see if he can talk to other churches who are willing to try his methods out. Now, basically, he would need to have them, distilled. Ben would need to have time to implement these and work with the pastor. And Ben, if he really cares about the denomination, switching gears to this, he would want to make sure that he really has the time and the support of his church to do this. But basically, Ben would be working on like almost a consultant form. He would be going to a couple of other churches and asking them to participate. He would want to kind of know their current attendance levels. He would kind of want to know the basic, I guess you'd say where the congregation is at in terms of their engagement. Maybe he would even have to do some survey work or some interview work to kind of understand basically the church's overall health. There are measuring tools for this and groups that will do this for you for a fee, but he might have to kind of do this on his own. And then he would want to kind of get that pre-reading of where they are, and then he'd want to get people to do one of these home groups or small groups and to get a couple of these launched in the church to see if people who took part in the home groups or small groups are either healthier or more prepared, if there's some sort of pre and post measurement of, I guess, their spiritual formation to see are these home groups successful? Do they create community? Yes or no? Do they create places where people feel like this is affecting their spiritual growth? Yes or no? And basically his project would be experimenting, trying to find churches to implement this and seeing did it work? Yes or no? Now obviously whatever Ben is really trying to accomplish in terms of what he's going to measure is going to need to be clear. He's going to need to find assessments. He's going to need a lot of time to communicate the vision, to train people, and to get this off the ground. But if Ben could do this with one or two churches, this could signal huge change in the denomination, because Ben already feels the churches who are doing this are growing. But if Ben could go to churches that are not growing and help them do this and them produce fruit, well, then of course he's got hard data for the denomination to see, and he can stand on really the work that he's done and say, see guys, this works. That would obviously take a lot of time and it would take a big investment. But if Ben knows people within the denomination, it's not as far-fetched as it seems. He would, of course, need to probably get the proper approvals to try this, to experiment. But sometimes when people aren't willing to make a big change, they might be willing to let you invest your time to see this change. So that might be one model of an experimental TP, would be for Ben to find people who are already pastors, who are already interested in this model, who want to put it in place. I mean, obviously, Ben can't do all the work himself. He's going to need to work with other pastors and other church groups that want to do this. But if he could demonstrate that it was effective, then his hypothesis that small groups or home groups are successful in making healthy churches, then he can put that in place and see, is that true? Okay, that is context number 4. And just let me zoom out for a minute. In fact, I'll kind of actually zoom in on the camera here. Let's just talk about this thesis thinking process. You're in a context, and I'm hoping that you can start to see what would it look like for me to do a discovery or an investigative. What kind of interview, survey, what kind of information would I gather? How would I try and understand the why of the problem? But then I also hope you can see the experimental side. What could I actually do and measure the success of to demonstrate that my theory is correct? This is the essence of thesis thinking, and as you get good at this, you realize that there are 10 thesis projects in one context. In fact, that's when you're getting towards the real clarity moments with yours, as you realize, I could measure so many different things, or I could experiment in so many ways, but what is it I feel like that uniquely needs to be done? What can I actually accomplish? And what am I actually passionate enough to stay up late and to figure out? Thank you for seeing this first series on thesis thinking for our Thesis Project Academy. I hope in the next videos to clarify even further how we move from project to writing and seeing chapters 2 and 3. Chapters 2 and 3 of the Thesis Project are perhaps the most challenging to write, and when you're still trying to conceptualize your own thesis project, it's important to get these pieces in place. You kind of want to know what your problem of ministry is. You want to know what you're going to do, what you're going to measure. Is it an investigative or a discovery? Then you're going to need to figure out what is the thing I'm going to measure, so what assessments do I need? Again, general wisdom is you don't create your own assessments. You try and find existing ones that have reliability, validity, or at least they're created by groups that have a good reputation. And then you're going to need to figure out, what do I need to know in the theological world about this? That's chapter 2. And what is my lit review, my chapter 3 going to be? All right, brothers and sisters, thanks for journeying. Thanks for kind of continuing this work. Let's continue our work forward and work on what is chapter 2 and what is chapter 3. See you in the next video.